general tips and best practices, as well as introducing the MOSAIC activity. We'll be talking about the experience section on your resume, as well as resources.
Awesome. Thank you, Elia. So we're going to talk now about general tips to consider when you you're about to graduate, you're looking for that full-time position. We'll really talk about today how the skills that you're learning, whether you're a researcher, receptionist, or that writing consultant, how the skills that you're learning can easily transfer into your next endeavors of that full-time position. So let's say you are getting ready to graduate. It's May, December, you are ready to start looking for that full-time position. What we're going to encourage you is to customize or tailor your resume for each job position. It does take more time, but the reason you want to do this is because of we call the applicant tracking system, or you may hear it called also ATS. So what this is that an organization will have a human resource department. They're typically the ones who receive the resumes first. So to give you an example, University Career Services at University of Houston, we have a applicant tracking system. So let's say we have a position for a career counselor at our office. We'll send that job description over to the human resource department because they receive the resumes. So what they do is that, let's say they get 100 resumes for that one position for that career counselor, they're going to run the resumes through this applicant tracking system. It's a software that scans the resumes to see how much are you like the job description that we were given. So you could be a great fit for a position, but if you're sending a general resume, it may not be hitting the keywords, responsibilities, and duties of that job description. And even if you apply, let's say, for a career counseling position in another institution, just the way that job description is written, it may look different. So yes, it does take more time to tailor and customize, but you have a better chance of getting through that system. And also for HR to take more time to look at your resume. Someone who's a human resource specialist, they may have never worked in your position. So let's say you're going into the engineering field. They themselves may not have been an engineer. So they're really going based off the job description once they get that filtered list of candidates from the software to see who they want to invite for, let's say, a phone interview. So some tips with this: first, know the keywords from your industry. So make sure when you're customizing your resume, I typically recommend having that job description out and going line by line and making sure anything that they're asking for is included in there. Now, what you don't want to do is you don't want to copy the job description exactly and put it in your resume, because you'll get through the system. But then HR is going to look at it and they're going to wonder why you just copied their job description over. And again, we want to customize it to each job description to give you the best chance of getting through that software and then getting to the hands of that human resource specialist.
So a few other things that you should keep in mind is tailoring your resume to the specific job description. So kind of as Miss Donna mentioned before, it's like tailoring it. You want to be sure that you're highlighting your most relevant experiences and the experiences that will really correlate with what the job is asking for. So when you're paying attention to the job description, you can kind of tailor your experience to what that job is asking for. You also want to keep your resume on one page and keep it presentable. So you don't want to use a bunch of crazy fonts or a bunch of different colors. You want to keep it straight to the point, black and white, Times New Roman. It makes it easier for the employers to read. And you also want, and also to get approved through the applicant tracking system. And you also want to use bullet points that are easy to read to kind of highlight those different experiences and goals that you've accomplished at your previous jobs. Also, your resume should be action-oriented. So you want to start with strong action words such as executed, composed, and modified. And you also want to keep your relevant sections to about 3 to 5 bullet points. You don't want to go too overboard because you want to stay on that one-page limit. But during your action-oriented and your bullet points, those are the times that you're able to highlight your experiences and to really explain what all you did at those different jobs. And you also want to be sure that it's filled with accomplishments. So you don't want to list too many general duties and responsibilities. You may want to highlight maybe some skills that you've learned, learned. And you can also highlight how you stood out from your peers in those similar roles. But you also want to be very specific. You don't want to be too general with explaining. You want to be sure that you're really getting your experience out to those employers.
So you may be thinking right now, well, let's say I'll take like the receptionist. Maybe I'm a receptionist, but I'm going more down the STEM field. How does that connect with what I'm doing now to what I want to do in the future? What you want to do, and this is probably the most important part of thinking about how do I market my skills as a student employee to the field I want to go into, is thinking about your transferable skills. So when we talk about transferable skills, what this means are skills that you could easily take from one position to another. This can even apply down the line. Let's say if you're in one field, let's say you're in education for a couple years and then decide to go down to a business field. You could still transfer some skills that you learned in education over to a business field. Same thing with your student employer position to a full-time job application or full-time position. So the transferable skills, you can think about them as those interpersonal skills. They could be skills with your personality. Maybe you're really good at being friendly, your positive energy. That's something you could always take to a full-time role. Your ability to be a good worker or hard work. Maybe you're someone who always takes that initiative. And that's something that would be useful in any company. Or even skills such as like teamwork, leadership, communication. Those are all necessities wherever you go. And as student employees, I know you've all built all that up, where that is something that you can transfer to your full-time position. Now, there may be some job-specific skills that we call hard skills. So let's say if you're going down more a STEM field, let's say for a researcher, maybe you need to know some kind of research technology or certain specifications in the lab. That may be things that you do in your part-time position, or they may be things you haven't done in your part-time position, but you can get that experience elsewhere, potentially online, maybe through other opportunities. But we can see here that there's a lot of ways you can market yourself for a full-time position because you have experience. What I hear a lot from students is, I don't have experience to put on my resume. I've only worked on campus. Just working on campus in itself, you have such a tremendous amount of experience to show to an employer. You just have to, one, take that time to really think about, what has my supervisor told me that I do really well? What are some skills that are things that I know the staff members or students come to me for because they say I do a really good job doing? You got to think about those highlights from your student employee position and then feel really confident sharing with them, because you'll need to do that in your resume and then in an interview as well. So what kind of skills are employers looking for? So NACE is a national organization for colleges and employers. And each year they ask employers in a survey, what are you looking for in new candidates? Particularly candidates who this may be their first position. This is the list here. It stays pretty consistent each year. And just from personal feedback I've heard from recruiters and employers, the skills you're really looking for, especially for someone who just graduated, is, I would say, communication skills and problem solving skills. The communication skills, both written and verbal, we've gotten feedback from employers that sometimes that communication with students who are applying may not be the most professional, either because they're using acronyms, maybe they're not setting up their email in a professional manner. And especially if you have not met someone before, if you're talking to them on the phone, virtually through a computer, or even writing them an email, that's your first form of communication with them. So if your first form of communication is not coming off professional, that's their first impression of you. And you don't want that to be. You want that first impression to be that you are professional, you're confident, and you are ready to apply for that position. The problem solving skills, you may be given a, let's say, task or project in a full-time role. You're given some information, but sometimes you're asked just to, like, can you figure this out for me? So you're really having to use that problem solving to maybe gather different resources or connect with different people who could further support you. These skills, along with the rest of the list, again, I know you do that as student employees. Just thinking about, let's say, I know some individuals shared like they were a writing consultant, receptionist. and researcher. For sure, I know the ability to work on a team you all have done, because either you're working with other staff members or working with other colleagues. All of you all have had to communicate, and probably with a variety of people. And you're also probably having to adjust, I can think for the writing consultant, how you're relaying that feedback to maybe someone you're working with on a writing for like an undergraduate student. That may look different than a graduate student. So all these are skills you've already developed as student employees. Now, what you have to do is just take that time to reflect back. You can even go down this list and think about, when was a time I took initiative? Maybe when was a time I showed that strong work ethic? And have those, however you best remember, in your head, write them down, because then you can make sure that's reflected on your resume, cover letter, any other documents you would need. And you can also have those experiences ready in the back of your mind to be able to talk about in an interview. So one activity that I want to do, and Caitlin's actually going to put this in the chat. If you don't have access to the chat, just let us know in the end and we can email it to you, the PDF. But one thing that I want you to think about as a student employee is just the multitude of different ways your position helps you just as an individual. So what this activity here does, it really is a nice visual aspect to think about your student employee position, almost like a puzzle, where you're adding different components to help the puzzle come together. So for a lot of students I meet with, they just say, well, I'm doing this student employee position, but I'm really just maybe utilizing it right now to maybe pay some bills or just to get some experience. That's definitely one way to think about your student employee experience, but you can think about it in a couple different ways. Think about how maybe your student employee experience has helped you with your academics. If maybe, let's say, being a researcher, you've learned different things in the lab, that in your academics, it makes a lot more sense because you're able to apply what you learned to the lab in your classes. That's one connection. You can think how it's shaped your identity. So maybe you've learned from your position different skills, your personality, maybe even what you like and don't like about certain work environments. And just developing those skills in general. We have to get experience to develop those skills, right? So you having this position has already started that process of building those skills that those employers are looking for. Construct a well-managed life. So you are not only a student employee, right? You're a student. Some of you may be caregivers, parents, friends. You probably have a lot of other titles associated with you, along with those responsibilities that come with those titles. So to add another aspect to the roles and responsibilities you do, you're really having to learn time management skills, right? And I can guarantee you that is something that is really great for an employer to see, because not only are you a student, but you're adding another aspect where they can see, almost like if you had different projects in a full-time position, they can definitely see from this that you can manage different roles, which again can transfer over to managing different. And lastly, contributing to a global citizen. So being at the University of Houston, or just Houston in general, since we are the most diverse city and our campus is extremely diverse. As a student employee, you're constantly interacting with different individuals all day. And that's something that not everyone gets that experience. I know for us, since we're always in it, this is very normal to us. But for some other institutions or other cities, it may not be as normal to interact with different individuals from different backgrounds. So that's something in itself that is always a strength that you can always put on an application, that you've had the ability to work with others, balance being a student and balance being a student employee, and then also making those connections about like what you've learned about yourself and then how it's helped you with your academics. So on the PDF that Caitlin put on the chat, this is just an activity for you. I have some questions here on the slide. But I would just encourage you to continue looking at the PDF, thinking about how it applies to you. And again, this really helps you take the time to really assess your student-employee experience, which again will further help you when you're talking to recruiters. So the next part I want to go into is the resume portion, and Caitlin's going to add on the chat our resume guide. This is what it looks like. We're not going to go over all the sections today, but if you do ever have questions about updating your resume or customizing it for a full-time position, know, just as Elia was saying at the beginning, that you can always schedule an appointment or come to our virtual drop-ins or virtual chats. The section that I do want to spend some time on is the experience section, because this is where you'll be adding your student employee experience. Now, for an experience section, I do just want to note that you can have different experience section titles. So you can have a work experience, which your student employee experience can fall under. Let's say though that you have other, like maybe you had an internship, and that's more relevant to maybe the full-time job you're applying for. Maybe you have an internship experience and then a work experience. Or let's say your work experience is actually most relevant to the job you're applying for. Maybe you resection the title to say relevant experience. So this is where that customizing comes into play to really showcase your student employee experience, how it would be a best fit for that full-time job. So with the experience section, you do want to use bullet points instead of paragraphs to talk about your what you've done in your student employer role. The reason why is because when people see paragraphs, we typically scan through it a lot more quickly, or we may just scan through it and not really read it. And really the goal is to make this resume and to make this section as easy for that recruiter to understand and process. Because on average, being generous, they look at your resume for 30 seconds. So you want to make sure your resume is easy to read, straight to the point, and they get a good sense of how your student-employer role fits their full-time position. You will want to include your employer name, location, job title, and dates. So let's say I'll take Elia, for example. If she's putting her peer career advisor role at the office, her job title would be Peer Career Advisor. Employer name would be University of Houston Career Services, Houston, Texas. And then she would add the date she's worked as a Peer Career Advisor, along with those 3 to 5 bullet points. That she would start off with the verb, talk about the task, and if she can, add that result. Now, I'm sure in your positions, you do more than 3 to 5 tasks in your roles. This is where that customizing comes in. You're going to choose the top 3 to 5 things that you do in your student employee position that connect to that specific job description. And we do want to be specific, and we do want to quantify and add details whenever we can. And we want to list experiences in reverse chronological order. So what that means is, let's say if you had 2 student employee positions, maybe your most recent one is that you worked at the library, and then you also worked at a front desk position at the College of Education previously. The reverse chronological order, what you're going to do is you'd actually list your library position first, because that was the most recent, and then second would be your front desk position at the College of Education. Just some things to be careful with the experience section. So with the bullet points, I like to think about them as being detailed but concise. You don't want them to be too long where, again, it ends up looking like a paragraph, but you don't want them to be too brief where someone has questions reading it. We'll go over some examples of those bullet points in a little bit. But anytime someone has questions when they're reading your resume, again, you're just giving them that opportunity to move your resume to the side and go on to that next candidate. And you want to make sure that you try to use different verbs throughout your bullet points. I know for a lot of times it may be hard to come up with different verbiage, especially if you've had different student employee positions that are similar. What I would recommend is looking at the job description, seeing what keywords they're using, pulling some of those. And you can also just look for synonyms. So if you're used research before, maybe you're looking for a different word that's similar, but it still adds that variety to the mix. So all your 5 bullet points aren't saying like research, 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 or like assist, assist, assist. It has that variety and the keywords on the job description. And we do have a resume action verb list that's available on our website that has some specific verbs and their synonyms on there. That is a good resource tool. But how to write a descriptive bullet point. So these are some examples here of how we can really go more into that detail with the bullet point to give that recruiter a good understanding of what we've done in that position. So let's say if you had originally said something like, I was a part-time sales assistant. I worked with customers, talking and helping them. If we see this on a resume, it is nice for me to see that you're an assistant and that you help customers. But if I'm having to look at different candidates and I have to see who has the best, let's say, customer helping skills, just telling me doesn't give me additional information. You can think about this as showing, you want to show them that you have these skills versus just telling them. And how you do that is through the details. So just an example is that instead of the part-time sales position, the customer service, we can quantify or add numbers. So we can say something like assisted between 75 to 100 customers daily on sales floor, resulting in employee of the month twice. So not only do I see that this individual has that customer service experience, I see they did it so well that they got employee of the month twice. But I would not have known that if they not had written that. Something else here, resolve customer conflicts by offering coupons or alternative solutions to ensure customer satisfaction. So going back to the customer question, I can see here that they took initiative. They didn't just let the customer leave mad. So I get a lot more information from those detailed responses versus if I'm really vague with the bullet points. So this slide here, I pulled some tasks that typically student employees, depending on your position, you may do, just to give you some ideas of what a strong bullet point could look like. So if you're in an administration role, maybe you're having to file documents. So instead of just saying file documents for office, think about what kind of documents you file, how many, where do you store them? So you could say something like process per shift 50 admission documents, including test scores and personal statements through PeopleSoft platform. So as a recruiter, I can see the number that you're doing a day, and maybe I'm like, oh, that's right in line with what I need for a full-time employee. And I can see you can use PeopleSoft. And maybe if you're applying to a higher education institution, I'm like, perfect. They are familiar with PeopleSoft. We use that too. So that's one less additional training I may have to do with this individual. If you manage a front desk, think about maybe the specifics of what you do at the front desk, and then which is maybe the one task that you do that's most connected to that position you're applying for. So maybe you need to be in a position where you're applying for a full-time job where it has a customer service component. So maybe you're honing in on interacting with customers or students in this case. So you could say something like answer questions through phone or in person and provide instructions to students on how they can schedule an appointment with their academic advisor. So I can see the specifics, I can see what this individual did. If you're part of the orientation team or you do any campus tours, instead of just saying showed visitors, what did you show visitors? How many campus tours did you lead? How many people were in those groups? So I could say something like, led 4 campus tours a day for groups of 20 guests and provided information on admission requirements and resources offered by the university. And lastly, if you do any social media, you can talk about what kind of, I would say, softwares you use to create those social media, and even what kind of social media accounts you promote. So here we have create promotional materials on Canva for the College of Engineering to share on department's Instagram and LinkedIn. That has increased department's social media engagement by 40%. So not only here do I see what platforms you know, but I can see that you posting on that social media and your flyers that you created has had a big increase. So this last portion, the engagement by 40%, I would call that a result. Not all of your tasks will have results, but if you know you've done something that has been implemented into the office, that has made a big effect, you want to make sure that it's included in one of those bullet points. So something I want to do for just a minute or two is I want to give you a little bit of time to practice of thinking about in my student employee position, if I was applying for a position, what are those transferable skills that I could take to a job? So I pulled, this is actual job description that I found online, is for a junior computer systems engineer. You may not be going into engineering or STEM, but this is a good example of even if, let's say, you are doing something that's more administrative, that you can still apply what you're doing even to a STEM field. So just to give you an example, and I'll give you a minute to think about it, and then you can add in the chat or unmark yourself to respond. But I want you to look at this list and think about what you do in your role that could transfer over to this job. Again, even if you're not planning on going to engineering. So just to give you an example, here it says promptly resolve problems for the local and remote user community. You may not know what a local and remote user community is, but I can guarantee you have had to solve problems in your student employer role. So you could think about this as, yeah, there was that one time maybe I had to solve a problem with the student who maybe didn't know how to schedule an appointment. That would be a transferable skill that you could think about potentially adding to your resume. So I'll give you a minute. You can go through the list, think about what in your current role could transfer over to this role, and you can add it into the chat, or if you want to mic yourself, you can. We have reporting a problem in a timely manner and connecting the dots backwards to find a solution for the problem. Yeah, definitely from your experiences, you may be presented, I can think about even being at a front desk where someone comes to you with something and you may not always be the right department for it, but maybe you're having to think backwards and thinking about who can I connect you to solve this problem. The last one, provide user support by phone or more access. Definitely agree, especially if you're managing a front desk, you're constantly providing that support. And basic level tech troubleshooting. All of you all being online, you probably have tons of experience now with tech troubleshooting. And this will just, and hope not all the time continue on, but it would be things you run into in the future that you now know how to proceed with or know how to handle. So thank you for sharing. But I do want to give you just that time to really think about, if I'm looking at a job description, to start getting that practice of seeing like what I do as a student employee is really impactful, and I can easily transfer this to any full-time job position that I see. It just takes that time before you apply to really sit down and look at these components of what you've done that relates to this position. If you are looking to get your resume updated or want some additional feedback, you can always schedule a 30-minute appointment with a career counselor or attend the virtual chats or drop-ins. We do also have something called VMOC though. So VMOC is a free platform for undergraduate and graduate students at University of Houston, where you can upload your resume to the VMOC system, which is at vmoc.com/UH. You do have to use your U of H email to sign in, but once you're signed in, you're able to upload your resume and it reviews your resume in less than 2 minutes and gives you instant feedback on anything from the content to the format and even the skills. So what skills are showing up on your resume and then how you can add additional skills on there. You do get a score and a benchmark as well. So you're scored and benchmark against other students who are in your major or industry, because the system knows that, let's say, an education resume may look different than someone who is in business. So you're scored within, let's say if you're in business, within all the business majors, and if you're in education, you're scored against the other education majors. But this is a great tool if you have something that comes up is after hours in our office isn't open, you can really utilize this tool to get the feedback up to your resume and go to that event.